And are we make sure we're recording as well?
That's what I'm doing. Because apparently when you share your screen, you cannot do other things. So, okay, it is recording.
Excellent. And then since we are doing a new format tonight, it's the webinar format. So to make sure that we can separate the public from the staff on this, Jody, to be clear, if we have people, you can see members of the public on your end?
I can.
Okay, perfect. So then that provides the opportunity for public comment, and we will get there shortly. So first off, under additions and corrections to the agenda, under consent.
Call roll.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
Councilmember Brudnicki.
Here.
Councilmember Iyer.
Present.
Councilmember McHenry.
Here.
Councilmember Remington.
Here.
Councilmember Hogue.
Here.
Councilmember Napland.
Here.
Councilmember Langle.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. So under additions or corrections to the agenda, under consent, please add payroll for May 20th, 2020 in the amount of $156,000, $528.30. And claims for May 19th, 2020 in the amount of $266,879.62. Under scheduled items, please remove King County Fire District Update 45. And please add firm update and emergency management update, which were scheduled for committee of the whole, and we ran out of time. Under new business, please add item number 5, Agenda Bill 20-42, ordinance designating Washington Federal as the city's depository. And under unfinished business, please remove Agenda Bill 20-26, which, as discussed at the committee of the whole, will come back to the council at the next meeting. So with that, do I have any council members that would like to speak this evening? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve this evening's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those
Aye.
opposed, please say no. Motion passes. Do we have a motion to approve this evening's consent agenda?
So moved. Mike Remington.
Second.
Councilmember Lingle seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, oh, thank you. All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. And this is our tricky part, the comments from the audience. First off, I would like to ask the clerk if you had any written public comments submitted.
Not that I am aware of, Mayor.
Okay. And do we have anyone in the audience that was wishing to provide public comment this evening? I see an individual on. If that individual would like to speak, please unmute your mic and introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes to speak. Okay, so it looks like the individual isn't interested in speaking, so we will keep moving forward, and I'll ask one more time if there's anyone on the line that would like to provide public comment this evening. Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to scheduled items. First up, mayor's report. It's been a very busy last couple of weeks. So first off, so to make sure I don't forget, I sent an email out to council yesterday regarding Senator Murray's bipartisan bicameral relief act that would provide direct assistance to small jurisdictions on Main Street to help with the COVID virus. We noticed that there was one small bit in there that would potentially make our city ineligible because of our high income level. So what I have an email to council yesterday is a letter thanking them for their support and their efforts for our state, and then asking them to potentially make one change that would provide a more positive impact for our cities on Main Street. And what I'm asking for, over the last few months, these requests for letters have come up so quickly that we haven't had time during council meetings to ask the full council support. And so as I put in my email yesterday, I would like to ask full council support to sign on to this letter, and we can put your name and title, et cetera, put it on the correct letterhead, because it was on the Office of the Mayor letterhead. I didn't have access to the general City of Duval letterhead, and get that off to our delegation tomorrow if folks are in agreement. Did everyone have time to read that? Councilmember Napland.
I did read it and I think it's great. Thank you for paying attention and always being on the ball with everything that's going on. It's just, you're an asset to the city in that respect for sure. So thank you so much. The one question I had is, it talks about certain monies being available for rural communities. And even though we're rural, we're a UGA, so we're urban. So do you see any conflict in that area that we should address?
Not yet. I haven't read the entire bill, which is why I put the point of populations under 10,000 that have a median household incomes above 80%, because we're a minority. And then that's why the line is including there that we're stuck between the rural and urban, not fitting to either category when it comes to federal funding. If there's language that folks have right now to strengthen that up, I'm happy to include it, or if council can just agree by consensus that if somebody sends stronger language that I can include it in the final version tomorrow, I can do that as well. Councilmember Langle.
As you know, Mayor, I very much support you doing this. I've been involved in Main Street programs in various capacities over the years. A point I think council has to consider in supporting this, and legislation is written often in a very broad way. This is a good time to try to influence it. After legislation usually comes regulation. That's another opportunity to influence. And then there's local implementation. And the interesting thing about Duval is if you look at the financing from the state for Main Street, we actually are described as rural. And so there may be opportunities to use these hybrid definitions for Duval to our advantage, but we have to get in there and be part of the discussion. And that's why I appreciate and support doing a letter. And I will, definitely sign on to something substantially in the form of what was provided. And I've already, I tried to contact you, Mayor, as you know, about this, and you've been super busy today. And then I passed along to Laura my comments, and I'm sure she'll convey those to you. So, but substantially in this form, I'm all for it. Let's go.
And if there is an edit, I can get it from the council as a whole, or get it from a council member and send out the final version and just ask if there's any objections. My guess is there won't be if everyone's already on board with the concept.
Really, my comment was more, you had a great sentence towards the bottom of the letter, and my comment was more like, move it up to the top.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, that's easy. I can do that. And that doesn't change the context of the letter. So
that's why I said substantially in the format.
So does anyone have any objections to us sending that? Okay, then I will go ahead and make that suggested change, and we'll get it out tomorrow to Senators Murray and Cantwell. I'll also be sharing it with Del Benny's office, and because we try and keep and coordinate with them as much as possible. Okay, so on Mayor's report in general, it's been a whirlwind of the last couple of weeks, as always. Congresswoman Del Bene, I think you already know part of the reason we're sending this thank you letter is we were asked late last week as mayors to sign on a letter of support to U.S. Senate leadership in favor of this bill. And so that has been introduced. We don't know where it's going to go. Hopefully it will go somewhere positive. I suspect it'll come out in some form. The question is what it will come out as. Late last week, Congresswoman Del Bene was instrumental in introducing the HEROES Act, which is a similar bill from the House side. The president said on the news that it's a non-starter, and if it comes from Nancy Pelosi, he's not looking at it. That said, if the Senate brings something forth, I don't think he has a choice but to look at it at this point. And really, I think that we're at that point where if we can get our businesses some more direct assistance, we'll be able to save more of our small businesses, and hopefully that will work. So I did forward to Councilmember Hoag's comment on what cities are doing. The Sound Cities update, which everyone gets from Deanna Dawson every week, had an update from the King County Economic Director or King County Economist. And I was actually quite surprised by some of the things we'll see, just like Councilmember Hoag is surprised about some cities' sales tax being up. Bankruptcies are down and non-farm employment is up, while building permits are down, closed sales are down, but housing prices are up and inventory is down. So we're seeing some really strange things going on here, and we'll get the sales tax report at the end of the week. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what that looks like for our March. I can't remember if I shared with council last week. Moody's had an article last week about the communities in the country that are most poised to recover quickly from this event, and Seattle is at the top of the list. So that's encouraging. That said, I think with all the legislation, we have to keep pushing it forward, because I think we're all fearful of that second wave in the fall. And if it does hit, what we make through this summer and early fall is going to really hamper us for the next 2 years after that. So I'm being cautiously optimistic. There are some good signs, there's some weird signs and some bad signs, and we're keeping a close eye on that as well. I think everyone knows that the mask order has gone into effect for King County. So if you are outside, you don't have to wear one unless you can't social distance, but we're directing our staff to pretty much wear their masks inside unless they're in their enclosed offices. And in that light, our finance director sent out the first preliminary look at funding and costs that may be eligible for the CARES Act. And honestly, a lot more of it can be eaten up by salary than I expected. And Sean, I'm sure we'll get to some of the difference between the financial assistance from FEMA and the CARES Act, and all of that challenge of figuring out what expenses to put towards what. Still waiting on guidance and the contract from the CARES Act. MRSC put an article out today that we're going to be given a direct allocation through the city SAW account. I didn't have time to dig into that, and that was thank you to Mr. DiGiulio, who sent that on to me this afternoon. So I'll be taking a look at that tomorrow. The other thing that I think is important, I don't know if Sean was planning on mentioning it, is that we did end up with a federally declared disaster as a result of the flooding last winter. And so our emergency manager has already put forth our application for that. We don't know if we'll be eligible for any of our expenses in that, but we're going to try and get some of that recovered. The Association of Washington Cities State and Federal Policy Committee met last week. We had a great meeting. There's definitely starting to be more focus on the broadband as essential service, and starting to really, there was a lot of discussion about the behavioral health and mental health side effects of COVID-19 and what we need to do as cities and the state needs to do to help provide support to folks. And that conversation will be ongoing. I can't remember offhand when our next meeting is. In addition, I think you've all heard about the fraudulent unemployment claims. We have had several employees that have been affected by that. As I know, numerous council members, the police chief has received, I think, over a dozen identity theft reports as a result. I did see an article that the FBI is suspecting it's a crime ring from Nigeria that has mules in the state. So it's a very coordinated, or in the country, so it's a very coordinated effect. And I know that the state is having a challenging time getting that under control so the people that need their unemployment funds can get them. So I think, from a city perspective, not just concerned about our staff, but members of our community that legitimately need benefits that may not be able to get them as a result of the fraud. I think you probably have all seen that the there are more cities that are moving up. Chief Hurt just piped in, there's more than 40 reports in our community alone. I think you've all seen that we've got some counties that have already moved to phase 2, and the governor announced today that there are many more counties that are eligible to apply to go to phase 2. We continue to advocate for our small businesses. While we're part of King County, and King County is by no means ready to go to phase 2. We do have areas and pockets of the county that don't have the population base and don't have the cases to warrant continuing to keep our smallest businesses closed. So we're continuing to try and push forward, getting some guidance and some loosening of regulations to let some of our tiny Main Street businesses reopen, because there's no doubt in my mind that they can handle PPEs and do it safely and appropriately. We had a team meeting last week, mostly emergency manager, public works director, and I, to start making the actual list of things that are necessary and what the tasks are moving forward to do some of the retrofits to our buildings. We have no idea what it's going to cost. In fact, I even had a staff request for the plexiglass divider between cubicles the other day. But to make sure council's aware, we will not be opening, even if we get to the right phase, we will not be opening regularly until we have those protections in place for our staff. So that could take a little bit longer. Let's see, I think I've got a couple more things. I'm trying not to miss things. It was a little challenging this week. Oh, we do have, I'm sure Sean will talk about it a little more, but we are talking about it at the Sound Cities board meeting tomorrow. The issue, and Sean can expand much more, we have an issue with King County deciding to take away all of our zone coordinators. And those zone coordinators and emergency management are our key link to King County with communications and getting supplies and getting our needs taken care of in our flooding and snow apocalypse. So from an administrative perspective, I've already reached out to the executive's office about this and hope to have a discussion with their government relations person tomorrow. And then finally, I had a regular check-in, almost finally, a regular check-in with Kelly Marquardt from Congresswoman Del Benny's office today. And of course, they're still continuing to push forward anything type of COVID-related relief they get. And we continue to share our anecdotes and stories with them about what we need. I did share with her today that while we're incredibly thankful for the CARES Act funding, and thankful that the governor is distributing it directly to our cities, it's not going to be enough. You know, we're cautiously optimistic that maybe it's going to be enough. It's not going to be enough to cover all our needs. And so, again, that's part of working out the FEMA PA side of it versus the CARES Relief Act side of it, and what additional money we might be eligible to bring in to support the city and the community. I think that about sums it up. Normally I have a lot more written down on it, so I apologize if I'm missing something, but I think that's kind of the nutshell of the last 2 weeks, besides working on all of our internal city related stuff. Anyone have any questions? Councilmember Hoag. Oh, and I just realized that Councilmember Hoag, we didn't get the resolution discussion on.
That's what I was, yeah.
So let's, so if that's not the question, we can take that. Otherwise, I think
That was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to the resolution to the council since you were at PIC last week?
I could. At the PIC meeting, we reviewed a resolution. It's a proclamation. I don't know if you, I mean, I emailed it to all of you to look at. It's a proclamation of a commitment to an inclusive community that rejects stigma and bias related to the COVID-19. Sound City members and residents of our member cities have voiced concerns about how xenophobia, description based on national origin, and a racial biased actions and harassment are impacting their neighborhoods, families, and businesses. This has been a devastating impact on the Chinese and Asian community. There's also been reported concerns about unsure physical safety while wearing masks amongst communities of color. So they brought forward this proclamation, and Bellevue, Burien, Redmond, Renton, and SeaTac have all adopted this resolution. So it's something, I'm not sure if you're going to be discussing it at Sound Cities Association tomorrow. And
It'll be a vote. So if we have a majority of objections to this on council, I need to know tonight. But in general, you know, I can say I'm in full support of it. I'm in full support of also doing a specific resolution specific to our community, as I've heard of some things happening in the last month. But I need to hear from you folks on it. So I guess the easy way to do it is, are there any objections to supporting the proclamation as it's coming forth to the board tomorrow? Okay, seeing none, that's great. Are there any objections to me bringing forth a council mayor proclamation or resolution for the next meeting for our community as a whole? Okay, easy peasy. Good, we will make that happen. Thank you. So with that, we move on to council reports. We didn't have anyone with a report, so we'll move on. Do any of the council committees want to provide an update? If not, that's okay as well.
I wasn't prepared for one tonight. I did ask if the rest of the committee wanted to report. I mean, mostly we talked about budget amendments. I don't know if there's anything else that Jennifer or Councilmember Langle wanted to bring up.
Yeah, seeing none, that's okay. It's okay. We've all been slammed. So, and again, it was just budget amendments. So moving on to the administration update.
Evening, Mayor and Council. Mayor, I was going to ask, would you like Sean and I to go under our COW items and go ahead and do those now?
Yes.
Reports.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and do administration first, and then Sean can do it as emergency management, and then you do the firm update.
Okay, I was out of town for most of last week, so I don't have an administration update. So
Okay.
Sean can go and then I'll go.
Yes, I can. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's Sean, Public Works or Emergency Management and so many other fun things. So I sent out the snapshot over the weekend. Again, hopefully that's useful information for you guys. Again, you get a summary, you kind of get a snapshot of snapshot. You get a look at what's been going on, sort of the conversations that are being had region-wide. So hopefully that continues to be useful to you in some form or fashion. So I'll go ahead and again, this is all pretty consistent, but let me get my screen share done. Share screen. And we're skipping ahead now. I was adding a little parking lot list of items that the mayor mentioned. Seemed like a good idea. All right, so again, this is all very similar format. I don't want to change things, then I get confused. So I wanted to show again, we've consistently showed all the case counts and what's going on. So this is actually from last week and last update. Again, as you go through week by week, it's once I started looking back at other updates, you really see how the case count has grown and how things have moved forward. And so I just kind of wanted to show that. So this is from last week, and then this is the current one today. So again, as you're looking forward, you're seeing the case count increase, but the percent positives are coming down, which is generally a good sign. Again, it just speaks to increased testing capacity and getting a little bit better definition on exactly what's going on and how it affects the populace. So statewide situation again is actually even a lower percent positive rate than the King County at large. But again, you see where the concentration of cases are and again, how that distribution has worked out so far. And again, this trends pretty well with what we've seen, you know, locally in the daily updates with King County and whatnot. There was a couple days this week where there was no reported deaths. The case count was a little bit down, but today they did have, you know, a similar amount of new confirmed cases. And then I think there was 6 reported deaths today in King County. Again, I don't know if my box blocks your box, but you're seeing the hospitalizations and the confirmed case count. So again, these are good. Those are generally trending downward. Obviously, the hospitalizations is coming way down. And part of that capacity that's important for reopening based on the governor's plan is having that surge capacity in hospitals. And so today, the the rate was 32% of ICU beds were available and 38% of general hospital beds were available. And I think the governor's order had said somewhere along the lines of a 20% surge capacity was going to be required in some of these counties that are now eligible to open up. So again, that's good news for for us and moving forward. You've seen this before. This is the phased approach that the governor has. I updated the dates on the bottom. So for whatever reason, 3 weeks extended just a little bit. And so it became June 1st is the new date. It was, I think, May 26th or probably May 26th, I believe is what it had been before, but just extended a little bit, which bumped everything else. So again, these are loose dates because they're achievement based. It's not date based. And again, for our purposes, I just program out 3 weeks. It gives you an idea of where we're at. There's a lot that's going to happen for us in phase 2. There's a lot of good things for Duval. There's a lot of good things for the region with it. Many different types of businesses reopening, many different types of activities getting back to a different kind of normal. But again, starting to kind of push the car forward and get things rolling again. Phase 3 is where we're really going to see obviously a bigger jump, and that's where government offices and buildings open up and some other restrictions are lifted. So we're looking at probably phase 3 if we're lucky for some of the playground activities, unless we get some real specific guidance in phase 2. That'll probably just all be waiting out a little bit longer, and that's something that's been obviously very important to our community because we have that demographic. So I just thought this was just a prettier version of that last one, so I wanted to put it in there. I might switch it out because it's a little easier on the eyes, but again, the same information just presented differently makes a big difference. Again, in phases 1 and 2, so this is some of that detail, and again, I updated those dates, but we'll see some restaurants opening, we'll see some new activities, salons, and different services that are getting to expand. And one thing we have seen that's definitely improved has been the guidance from the governor's office. So we've seen some pretty specific information that's been put out recently on looking ahead to phase 2. So at first we were in phase 1 and figuring out phase 1, but now they're starting to work ahead of the game. So we're seeing some phase 2 guidance. It's gonna be very important for those industries and then for us to understand also. And I'd imagine that's gonna carry forward. So hopefully they'll start giving us sneak peeks at phase 3 as we're achieving phase 2. So that is definitely our hope. As the mayor had mentioned, this was from today, a conference or press conference with the governor. And these are some of the new eligible counties. I think there was 10 or 7. I know those are different numbers, but there was definitely some new ones that were given eligibility. And again, that's because some of the achievement base, it was a reduction in positive test cases for a period of time, as well as an increase in capacity for those surges and some other achievements. And apparently this is a process that the counties apply for, and they walk through the whole process on the call, but not particularly pertinent to this discussion. But again, what we're seeing here is improvement, right? And some people are getting back to work, and eventually it'll be us, but we'll probably be one of the last ones, obviously. So this is just in here all the time. You guys like to see these little graphics. This is in here all the time too. But again, we're continuing to use the same methods we established at the very outset of this incident to kind of track what we're doing. That's starting to build our case. It's starting to build the picture of how this has affected us particularly. This is an old slide, but again, I thought it was worth mentioning. So much on the CARES Act is still up in the air. I mean, there's some real broad interpretations and there's very little definition still. We look at the question and answers and the guidance, and purposefully so, I'm sure. I mean, they do provide a lot of the opportunity for the reasonable judgment of the government officials responsible. So I think those are bumpers that some cities are definitely going to find, and not in a good way. And so we're definitely waiting to kind of see where those bumpers are before we hit them too hard. So we're definitely threading the needle a little carefully. And again, CARES is a part of FEMA. It's a part of, well, it's not a part, but it will work with the FEMA PA process and some others. And I'll add one more thing toward the end of this on that. But something that was interesting, Mayor, I don't think this was a dream I had or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure it was last week. Didn't the county mention there was going to be some distribution of their CARES funding directly to the cities? And I believe I remember a $25,000 minimum.
Yes, so Councilmember Lambert is giving us 5,000 directly from her own personal council member budget for human services, rent assistant, LIHEAP, and what have you. What I am understanding at this point is that money may come directly to the city, but that is specifically to help our businesses. So we will have to move quickly in developing contracts and how we determine who gets what. In addition, as it looks, not having all the details yet, our Chamber of Commerce should be getting a $5,000 direct allocation, which will be very helpful for them as they try and stay staffed up. They've got 2 part-time people that I have no doubt are working full-time right now, and doing a bang-up job of getting information out to their members and communicating. So it's, again, we don't know exactly when it's going to come, what the strings are going to be, but we will have an opportunity to, even if we as a city run out of CARES Act funding, we will have an opportunity to provide some assistance from the county funding. So that's very positive. It's a small amount, but honestly, with some of our small businesses, a small amount can mean the world to them right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the mayor's point, I mean, that means jobs for certain places. And
Mhm.
and again, it's a really fine line, and we're all working to try to figure it out as quick as we can, because if you're late to the barbecue, you don't get any hamburgers. And it's just one of those things, if we're not timely and we're not where, in the right place when people need it, we could be losing opportunity. And so again, we're really going to work hard to understand that, but the guidance is just a little slow, and we got to get our feet underneath us first. So.
And when that guidance comes, rest assured, our staff that are involved will be dropping everything pretty much to make sure that we are able to capitalize on these processes and help out.
Exactly. All right. So moving on to financial impacts. And again, this is just kind of the regurgitation of what we're usually at. So this is this is expenditure. So you can see the new AP run. Again, we're totalizing this as we go. This is available in the spreadsheet that Dana's been updating right before every council meeting. So it's been really great. Again, it's giving us that running total, that kind of active look at where we're at. And this is stuff that we actually spent. We've received a fairly decent amount of supplies and material from King County, from other resources that have caught up to us. So those are all donated resources. Those are all tracked a little separately. It's not something that we're out of pocket for or reflecting as expenditures, but our donated material has a value. I have not attached a value to it, but it's definitely a good amount of money between sanitizer and masks and gloves and just all sorts of personal protective equipment that we've been able to secure. The chief has through other resources he has, and then also King County OEM has definitely been catching up a lot. So that's sort of where we are for those particular incident expenditures. Financial staff impacts. Again, you can see the breakdown by period, by type, and sort of what's going on here. You're definitely seeing that back down, and just really pretty kind of a stabilization of those costs and individuals being involved. So it's really kind of dialing down to just a little bit of involvement overhead, but mostly myself, of course, and then you have some directors at some other time. So I think you're seeing that kind of smooth out a little bit. One thing that we're really looking to interpret in CARES is going to be really vitally important here is in FEMA and how they look at related to emergency. So work related to an emergency or unbudgeted or budgeted for that matter. And so that's where we're really going to be trying to work to thread the needle to find places where you can put my time or my salary costs, because again, I'm not doing what you guys generally hired me for, right? I'm in a different capacity doing something else. So that's where there is some eligibility in some of the FEMA programs, but CARES is definitely where I think not just us, many other cities are looking at. That's a place that we might be able to recoup some of this cost that we don't usually have people who, respond to pandemics. And so again, substantially dedicated is another very important term in the CARES document, but we're trying to figure out exactly what substantially dedicated means and interpret that correctly. So hopefully we don't hit those bumpers that we talked about earlier. So. But again, you're seeing the roll up of costs. You're seeing how it's kind of split up over time, and this will keep going forward. So revenue, we didn't change anything with the ball fields. I mean, that's kind of a static spot. not a lot for, at least not for me to report on revenues. I think there's a lot of eyes waiting for, I think June when we'll see April. I think that's right. Or is it March? But anyways, as we get a little farther along, there's that lag in sales tax reporting and just waiting to see what happens there. But what we are looking at is, again, utility billing. And Dana, I don't know if you're listening, but you and I didn't have a chance to talk about this utility bill aging numbers. But do you mind trying to pop in and explain a little bit?
Sure. So we pulled reports, or Stephanie, I should say, pulled reports from May 19th, 2019, and this is May 19th, 2020. And then I just compared them. So you can see that there's a variance in the 30 to 60 days, I mean, we're not concerned about that under 30 days. It's these 4 categories out here that are more concerning. But as soon as the governor lifts the state of emergency, then we'll start figuring out what we're going to do as far as payment plans and getting people to get caught back up.
Yeah, and we talked about, we hinted at this a little bit before, and again, I don't have anything for you today. It's an ongoing discussion, but just again, understanding we got to meet people where they are, and the day this is lifted doesn't necessarily mean much difference to the person who's behind. And so we need to make sure that we're finding the right policy or making the right revisions to policy to account for, hey, you know, they're not going to be able to pay, and what maybe is our typical time frame. And so let's find the right way to extend that, or find the right other mechanisms that we can use to support folks. So again.
And this is also exactly something that some of that money from the county can be used to assist with. So even prior to the end of the emergency, we can put some standards together that other cities are already likely doing that can provide some forgiveness for some of those utilities with certain conditions in place.
Sean, Mike Remington, do you have time for a quick question?
Of course.
Do we know, is there a separation or have a sense of how many of these are residential versus businesses?
I can answer. Well, I checked for the April one. There's not as many businesses that haven't paid in May that didn't pay in April. But when I looked at the April numbers, there were more businesses in 2020 that hadn't paid than there was barely any in 2019. And then there was definitely a few businesses on there in 2020. So.
Thank you.
So yes, there you go. Thank you, Dana.
Councilmember Lingle?
Per the new procedures, I want to ask with all of council if they have an objection to I know you're already working on this, Mayor, but I'm really going to need to see a little more of a budget analysis. We're already getting pieces of it for the emergency related expenses. Let me give you an example. You know, the projection here is on this primarily on the salary side. You know, we'll have $160,000 worth of COVID related expenses embedded in the budget amendments that we'll be looking at in the next meeting probably. But we also know there's a lot of technology expenses that you've incurred. So it would be really helpful to me if we could get a look at COVID related expenses, I guess now the flood too, but primarily COVID related expenses that are embedded in the budget projections, so we can have a better sense of what our recapture might look like as that might intertwine with the budget amendments. And then, and I was just going to add one more thing. I just want to make sure, Mayor, you saw my email to Sean. Yep. Ship me as much information as you have. I know it's evolving. I'm trying to get ahead of understanding the potential of reimbursement where we're vulnerable. I talked to Dana a little bit about this. I realize that some of our expenses are not going to be 100% recaptured. That's normal. So if that's not an expectation on my part, but I want to get ahead of understanding it, because to me, these things really do merge and impact the budget amendments and certainly going forward in 21, 22.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why, you know, we've got everything coded and
right.
Stephanie Goodwin sent out, you know, she's been sending out those sheets of expenses that are coded related to the emergency. So I don't think that'll be a problem to get now that we're finally getting bills in place. I do have to say this week we had to order a few more computers for myself included, because frankly, I can't get my work done on the Surface. It is very dysfunctional for the amount of time I'm on screen at home. And my Surface is dying to begin with. But should be able to get that. And then I thought I had sent out to folks previously the draft CARES Act guidance. So I can get that out to council. And then the digging part for me is the rules on FEMA public assistance. And Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that often depends on the incident and what they decide is eligible or not. So we'll be definitely, I mean, we're finally actually getting the expenses in place and seeing those bills come in. So we should be able to give an update of that, I would expect, at the next meeting or the next meeting.
And the work so far has been really not only positioning us well, I just want to get, I want to look at it programmatically so I can see how it blends in with the whole. And, I'm tracking everything Sean says in his reports, and I'm, looking for the consistency. So the more programmatic I can look at it, the easier it is for me to see the overall implications for the budget amendments as well as 21-22. So
yeah, and the hard part, I mean, you've heard me say it, and I'm going to be a broken record on this, is a lot of this stuff we're not going to know until we know.
Right.
We can estimate the salaries, but it's the retrofitting, it's the additional sanitizers. For example, part of our conversation last week was how many hand sanitizers do we need for our buildings, and how do we separate folks in social distance so when the OPMA restrictions are back to normal. So we're doing, I know you know this, but we're doing the best we can as fast as we can. But all of us are struggling to get all of this stuff together as quickly as possible. But we should be able to have some of those updated numbers. The future cost is, besides salaries, is what we're going to have some trouble with.
Yeah, and Dot, or Councilmember Langle, sorry,
That's
I
okay.
did.
That's who I am.
I sent out a spreadsheet with the amount of expenditures that are actually budgeted in the budget. So right now we only have $40,000 in this budget amendment for the emergency services, supplies, and laptops. But
yeah, I've read it. In fact, I've physically got it right in front of me. So I'm on it.
all right.
And maybe we want to put this on, this is a higher priority than some things. Maybe we want to put this on an F&A committee discussion with Sean there. That's up to you, Mayor, but it's going to be a big piece of whatever we spend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I like what Dana said. I mean, some of the regular time, it really depends on how that person was, if they're reassigned versus doing work. So we were pretty liberal in, hey, if you're doing something COVID related, track it. And so if you're a maintenance worker and you're putting up tape at the playground, track it. And that may or may not become eligible. And I've done a few of these. And I mean, honestly, when you're at the table, depends on who you have, who your program officer is. And some of them will sit there and say, well, I think you maybe really did do this. And but you might get somebody who says, no, I don't think you did this at all.
Right.
And so I can tell you a large portion of this literally happens at the table. And you might bring a spreadsheet. Yeah. You bring a spreadsheet full of stuff, and then they, move down the line. And usually it's always been really good, actually. But that could go either way. So, and one of the expenses specifically in CARES was expenses to improve telework capabilities for public employees to enable compliance with COVID-19 health precautions. And we think that should be perhaps quite a catch-all for a lot of the technology items we've incurred, which is a good thing. It's a big expense, and it's something that's useful for us forever. Are we okay there? I've only got like 1 or 2 slides left, I think.
Councilmember Naplan.
This is super quick. You brought up a bunch of different categories of expenses, and I was, all of the, besides the personnel expenses, most of the other expenses have been kind of lumped and just broken down into which week or run they belong to. But is there any way we could get a categorization of expense, like building retrofit type expenses, IT related expenses? Because some of the IT related expenses have an ongoing benefit. We now have new computers for many employees, which were needed for coronavirus, but I think that's great. So I don't know if that's something we could get, is more of a categorized, what are we spending our money on? And then the other question I had is, I promised my son, who is a third grader, that I would bring this up at a meeting. He wanted to know when the parks were going to open. I told him not yet, but he also wanted to know if we would have hand sanitizer at the parks. And I
Yes.
thought there could be a problem with, you know, vandalism, but he's very concerned that we maybe need hand sanitizer, and he wanted me to let you know.
Sean,
That
you've
was
already,
the idea.
Sean, you've already ordered those, haven't you?
We have ordered hand wash stations. And so, yeah, we're trying to get those, and we'll see if hopefully they come in, because I'm sure everybody else has, but we ordered those a week and a half or maybe 2 weeks ago. We'll see if they show up. But we do have a pretty decent amount of hand sanitizer. We've talked about perhaps making like a, you know, fabricating like a little hand sanitizer, because actually resupplying it could be a difficulty. And so we're trying to find the right way to do that. And again, yes, I think that's something that's going to be in our life and in our future coming up. We're working ways to fix that somehow. And Mayor, you mentioned something earlier, and I don't know if it even matters, but specifically for COVID, the only type of eligible costs are called Cat B. So they're Category B expenses and only related to emergency response. So usually there's a few different categories under FEMA declarations, and the only ones authorized for this are Cat B.
Yeah.
For whoever needs to hear that.
So in relation to the parks, to answer that question, we have had a couple of requests to open the skate park. And frankly, we're not ready. We need to make sure that our parks have appropriate signage for social distancing, et cetera. And, you know, I think we'll be there pretty close with the skate park. The other parks, even if we get to the point of opening, until we have a proper sanitization protocol and ability to carry it out in place, we're likely to hold off on that. This is the area where we might be behind some of other jurisdictions. And part of this will be simply being able to obtain equipment. So for example, the police department requested, I can't remember the name of it, but basically you spray disinfectant on everything. They still haven't received it, and it was ordered quite a long time ago. And then the other challenge is receiving being able to get the proper chemicals for it. So from one of my big concerns is that while children at this stage aren't the biggest risk factor, the suspicion is that they transmit the virus asymptomatically. And we need to make sure that we can make sure that the equipment is sanitized on a frequent enough basis to help reduce the risk of infection. So we'll get there. And I mean, gosh, trust me, my kids wanted to open too. When we came home this weekend and they saw the tape was off, they said, "Mom, the park's open." And I said, "No, it's not." So we'll get there, Jennifer, Councilmember Naplin. But our staff, we have to make sure that we've got the right things in place to make it safer for the community. So, but that we need to, you know, that's something personally I would like to see open sooner rather than later. It's just going to be, I think, a little bit harder road to get there.
Yeah, and to that point, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So my question is, in regards to summer is the time when businesses downtown do like little events and such, and looking at the phasing, it seems that King County, because of where we're at, I'm just curious to know if by June, do we think that we'll be in phase 3 for us?
No.
So that those businesses can do their activities?
No. Sean, forgive me for answering. I don't think we are going to be there. That said, one small part that I did miss in my report is I talked to our summer stage coordinator yesterday. Last week I was ready to cancel the whole thing, but we are going to continue with planning with riders in the contracts that we can cancel if we're not to that point. But I'm not confident that we will get to phase 3 before the beginning of July. Sean, do you want to chime in on what you're seeing?
Well, I hope you're wrong. I hate to say that in
I know.
an
I
open
hope
phone
I'm
call,
wrong
but
too.
yeah, I mean, just by the math, you know, you'd hope by the end of June. But again, they were very clear that 3 week was a minimum, and we did see that phase 1 was extended for a reason or for a convenience of, you know, getting to a certain date. But yeah, I don't think we have much certainty.
I suspect the next check-in date will really be 2 to 3 weeks after Memorial Day, because I can tell you there's lots of people that are traveling. The question is, do they follow all the guidelines while they're traveling, and do they come self-contained, or do they ignore social distancing guidelines and expose people potentially in other areas of the state? So I think it's really hard to have these unknowns right now, but we have to be patient and sit tight and wait.
Yeah.
So can I ask one more question?
Yep.
Just so I make sure I'm obeying whatever the regulations say we're supposed to be doing. So what I understand, we're in King County, so we're not even in phase 2 yet, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So that means like having a pizza party at your house with 5 people right now is really not kosher right now.
Correct.
Okay, just checking.
And I've been receiving complaints about people not social distancing at their homes and having neighborhood parties. I do know personally of some families that have been completely isolated, and because of their age of their kids, they're getting together, but it's only those groups they're getting together with, but that's still not the advisable guidance at this point.
Okay.
Tracking back real fast on the parks thing. So we're, well, 2 things, I guess. So Sarah Rulin, the executive assistant, she's actually going to be tasked to help do some emergency management functions also. So she's going to help start to clean up and tidy up some of the things that haven't been able to get finished. So she started with that today, doing kind of re-inventorying what we have. She's compiling that and updating the existing list. She's going to pull some other things out. So I think that'll be a big help. It'll help finish some tasks that have been lingering for a while. And then also she is specifically working on some park signage. So we figured that's going to be with us for a while. And so we're intending to add some signage, just reminders to every park. Again, nothing too Orwellian, but just good reminders of, hey, here's kind of some just regular cues to keep. So
1 moment.
Siri's talking to me. So then on the other, and I'll be real fast about this. I know I've gone pretty long, but so one thing that was mentioned today that was interesting is in our countywide OEM call, they mentioned that there was a presidential statement last night apparently about that the CARES funding would be eligible for the 25% match, the FEMA match. And that's usually a big no-no because you can't use federal money for federal money. I don't know about the veracity of the statement. It was made in the countywide call, and they said, yeah, it was really strange, but this is what was said. It would be pretty neat for a lot of people. Again, I mean, that's a 25% gap that the city has committed that they will not help fill. The state has said they will not fill. So it'd be neat, but I'm not going to count on it. But that would be a benefit to lots of smaller jurisdictions, especially. We still think we can backfill a lot of that 25% match with some other things. We have a pretty significant amount of volunteer time that would count towards that and some other things. But anyhow, that's one development. The mayor mentioned the zone coordinator issues. There's 2 zone coordinators for King County. I'm not gonna go into details about it. It was just a very strange decision that King County authorized, or they exercised an option on a contract. And again, these are people who've been in their positions for many, many years. It's the only person I've ever known in the zone, and it is every single city's tieback directly to King County OEM. So they operate outside. They're under contract by KCOEM, but they work as like a liaison and on the city's behalves. And so this was announced just very suddenly last week, 0 discussion. And then it was like, and the cities are reacting accordingly. They're not very happy with the decision from KCOEM. So I think that there's some coordinated effort there amongst a lot of the cities to say, wait a minute, and if it's a business decision, you want to make a business decision, don't do it in the middle of a pandemic and terminate these people's contracts with like a couple days notice, or a couple weeks, I should say. So more on that, but it was not a happy decision with the cities. And the mayor had mentioned we did officially submit our 2 RPAs. So those are requests for public assistance. There's a grants portal. We've registered for it, and I did submit the RPAs officially for the COVID event that was created, and the January, February 2020 flood and landslide, not the snow event, which was not part of the declared window. So we think we may be able to recover some costs on that, being overtime primarily. There was some costs, particularly for the treatment plant operation to kind of maintain 24-hour operations on that with what we were seeing. So that was probably not a huge amount of money, but we may not have chosen to do this if we weren't already going to be doing it anyway, because it is a big effort. It's a lot of work, but we think that there's some opportunity there. The mayor mentioned the unemployment claims, and then also the facility retrofits and the other things we're looking at for staff safety. It's going to involve some real differences in lobbies and things like that. So we're going to very carefully look at that. Steve and I have a meeting tomorrow with a person who's done similar retrofits at other cities. So they're going to come and take a look specifically at City Hall and see, one, those serve security functions, which are a benefit, but also there's a physical barrier that has some COVID protection as well. So we'll get you guys more information on that, but those are definitely things that we're working on. We don't have any hard and fast costs on those, but definitely important items. So
Sean, if I can add to that, besides the facility retrofits, what's included in that is also looking at our HVAC systems and seeing how the air circulates, because I think everybody's seen the graphic of the call center where an entire half floor became infected, and it was tied to airflow. And so that's one of the things we're gonna take a look at to see if we're at risk as a result of that, and if so, what we can do to retrofit to help alleviate that challenge.
that is the end of my report.
Any more questions for Mr. Tozer? Councilmember Iyer.
Where are we at operationally in terms of, I know a lot of what this does to your operations, it slows everything down and creates people deficits. Where are we at in this phase now that we're in terms of maintenance staff?
So maintenance staff, they brought on additional, and Steve, you want to handle that, or do you want me to mention something? You're here on my screen. So we've got 3 locations right now. We just opened up a 3rd location, primarily to house the crew, the summer crew guys. And so Public Works crew is working out of 3 offices to maintain distance. They're trying to single up in trucks. So I think that was new this week. Steve, you should really probably speak to some of this. You know better.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council, and any citizens that are out there. Steve Laniszewski, Public Works.
Hold on. Have you gotten a haircut? Where'd you get your haircut, dude?
You know, I am proud to say that is a haircut I gave myself.
Wow. That's impressive. Sorry.
We tried to have the family do it, and it was too painful. I just told them thank you and never again. So it worked out. I got lucky. But thanks for noticing that. So yeah, like Sean said, we have all the crew are back to normal operating hours, Monday through Friday. We have staggered the start times a little bit to have supplies obtained from the shop when necessary. So there's 3 crews. Joe, the supervisor, is floating and managing all of them. 1 crew under Gavin's normal direction as crew lead is working out of the shop. Another crew out of Mike Zielinski's direction as the other crew lead is operating out of the Rose Room. And then with Joe managing the summer helpers, they are all operating right now out of the youth center or the rec center. So commingling the fellows was a lot of overlap, and they were getting uncomfortable, and which rightfully so. We had a meeting last Friday and kind of went forward with all this, conferring with the mayor that morning and getting things done. So right now it's working really well. The summer helpers we do have, speaking very highly not only of our staff but them. Most of them are all repeats. They know what to do. Their value is significant, and they have their own thoughts. Most of these guys are just in high school, or the 3 real leaders are college kids, and they're like, hey, can we store things under the youth center? We can keep our mowers and our weed eaters handy. We don't have to go to the shop as much. And they're like, absolutely. So they're doing a great job. So we are separating people. We still are operating with, Sarah will be in the office, looks like 2 days a week, fluctuating space with Alana because she shares an office. Larissa's still working at home. I'm here, and Sean is between here and home, as am I. So we're trying to be flexible in the space and give people the amount of volume of air and space that's necessary to keep everybody healthy. We have check-in procedures at each building, so we're taking care of there. Everybody has their PPE packets. Our face masks are handy. We're using them when we're outdoors in tight spaces, as the guys are doing a water service fix today. You know, the couple that were by themselves in the space that was tight had their masks on when they were out, you know, commingling amongst the equipment, and they were 6 feet apart. They were not wearing it outdoors. So we are working on trying to keep everybody safe and healthy, because if we lose one and it spreads like wildfire, we've got a bigger problem on our hands. So hope that
Thank you.
helps.
Right. Anything else on emergency management? Seeing none, thank you so much, Mr. Tozer. You really have been doing an incredible job. I think I tell you that pretty much every day, but
Nice, thank you.
you know, between you and your leadership for our staff, it's been it's definitely reduced my worry level as a mayor significantly, and I think it shows directly in the community. And we appreciate you taking your time in the evening to come to us as well. So thank you. With that, we'll move on to the firm update. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Mayor. So good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to share my screen. This is a really quick update because it's one of several touches. So about every 10 to 15 years, the federal government updates its flood insurance rate maps. And that is basically a correlation of how you pay flood insurance, and it's operated through FEMA. And every so many years, we go through an audit with the Department of Ecology on our floodplain policies. It was last done in about 2005. And this federal government has been working with the state, and more specifically with King County, on the update to our maps. They've actually been drafted for, I want to say, almost 6 years, but it goes through iterations and goes through public comment. And it's now getting towards those final phases. The county has held community meetings, and we're now going to start the implementation phase of the firm maps, which this is just a snapshot really quick of a portion of our map. It's in your council packet, and we will adopt these maps in August. So we have we have quite a few meetings to go through, but we'll also be updating our floodplain management policy, which is within our zoning code. And so I've been working with the Department of Ecology on that for a couple of months. Historically, they've provided what we call model ordinance. This time the state did not do that, so we were a little bit more on our own, but we have a really good relationship with our ecology partner. And so we're going to be able to do it on our own without a lot of consultant time, if any, but I will run through the policies with our city attorney team as soon as I complete my work with Department of Ecology. So this was just kind of a basic first step update. I can take any questions that you might have.
I'm not seeing any council questions. Oh, Councilmember Lingle.
You said it's in the packet, right? The maps?
Correct.
It's a little hard to see the maps on the screen. I can't expand them. So it's in the, you said it's in the packet, right?
Yeah, correct. It's in the COW packet. And so you can go in there, and if you have whether you have Adobe or whatever you have, there's a little roll button and you can expand it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was looking at the same slides. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So if we don't have anything else from Ms. Thomas, we'll go ahead and move on to new business because we do not have a presentation or a public hearing this evening. So the first item is Agenda Bill 20-38, and it's an ordinance to waive and refund special event processing fees. This is a first touch. You know, if you think it's simple and you like it, feel free to suspend your rules, but we will let the clerk take the lead on this.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and guests. Jody Wyckoff, City Clerk. As mentioned in the agenda bill, we have an ordinance in front of you for consideration to waive and or refund special event processing fees. I also call them application fees interchangeably. So I'm talking about the same fee if you hear me slip up and call it the wrong thing. These fees, $25 per fee, and our code currently states that the fees will not be waived or refunded. Therefore, if council would like to consider authorizing refunds or waivers, it does have to be passed by ordinance because it is currently in code. I don't have a lot of other information. I'm kind of looking at the packet right now to see if there's anything else. One thing that our attorney Anne Marie assisted us with was the verbiage on the waivers and the refunds, and basically this would be for anyone who had to cancel the refunds would be for anybody who had to cancel their event during certain dates. They would have to request the refund and provide documentation that the cancellation was due to COVID, which could be as simple as an email explaining that due to the stay home order, they were not allowed to have their event. And then the waivers would be similar, that they would also need to request a waiver and give documentation that would demonstrate the need for the waiver that was due to the COVID pandemic or other financial inability to pay. The mayor requested the waivers be added simply because a lot of the special events that the city has are organized by nonprofits that are being hit really hard financially right now. They can't have their regular fundraisers. A lot of their events are their fundraisers. So this also would currently only be in effect until December 31st, 2020, unless otherwise amended or repealed by council, and would not affect any events that are paid for in 2020 that would actually happen in 2021, because we do get some stuff in December for like March, April timeframes. Other than that, I am available to answer any questions.
Ms. Wyckoff, I just do want to add to that a little bit. And the impetus was partly because as the last couple of months, hearing from the nonprofits and the organizations that are trying to figure out how they continue to move on and raise money, we are also thinking about, and some of the small business concerns on Main Street is not having those events. So trying to eliminate the barriers that when the restrictions are off, we can encourage the events that will then promote picking up the economic development on Main Street. So and the whole intent is specific COVID related. Since we don't have B&O tax or other things, there's not a lot we can do. This seemed like a small thing that would be helpful and that the groups in our community would feel thankful for. Councilmember Brudnicki.
I'm very comfortable with moving forward on this bill. I don't really need to have further discussion. And I think in good faith, supporting the community in that, in whatever little ways we can, is always a good idea.
Looks like Councilmember Langle also has a question or comment.
All right, Councilmember Langle.
I actually not really. I mean, I was just thinking about, since this is embedded in the code, what I've seen in some other kinds of contracts is language that's specific to things like pandemics. Mm-hmm. And in which case it wouldn't need to sunset, I guess. I mean, that's just an alternative. It doesn't have to be that way.
We are looking at revising the special event policy in general, and I will be working with the attorney to get some advice on whether or not it should be in code or not. So I think we're going to look at all of that at that time.
Sure.
Councilmember McHenry.
I think this is a great idea, and I would move that we suspend our rules and vote on this tonight.
I think Councilmember Naplin had a comment really quick before we. No? Oh,
okay.
Well, then I'm going to put your hand down.
We have a motion by Councilmember McHenry, a second by Councilmember Iyer to suspend the rules in order to vote on this ordinance this evening. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of waiving the three-touch rule, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes.
I would like to move that we approve AB 20-38A, adopting ordinance authorizing refunds and waiver of special event processing fees through 2020, providing for severability and establishing an effective date and expiration.
Second, Michelle Hoag.
All right, so we have a first by Councilmember McHenry, a second by Councilmember Hoag. Any further discussion on this item? So seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. We do not have any objections, so just to clarify, if there are, raise your hand so that we can do a roll call. And there are none. So thank you very much. I know this is just one of those little things, but I think it will be appreciated by the community. So thank you for moving that forward quickly. Next up on our agenda, we have Agenda Bill 20-39, resolution for the 2021 to 2026 6-year transportation improvement program for discussion. Mr. Leniszewski.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Steve Leniszewski, Public Works. So in the packet, you have an updated staff report. We did speak about this at the 4/21, I think it was a COW meeting, to introduce the subject and topic and advise you of the schedule. There were a couple of questions which I tried to answer in the top of the staff report, and you will notice a revision date in the top right corner for the staff report of the previous version. Questions that arose last time were, should the city defer? Can the city request of the state, deferment of the due date of July 1? I did reach out to other agencies, and one of them directly asked the state the question on a larger group of our behalf. The state said that they were not pausing any process. They consider this normal and routine for the governor's orders and expected people to carry on with their normal work to require them to have their tips adopted by July 1. So with that said, another part of the topic we've discussed is, how large of an overhaul do you do, working with planning staff and our transportation consultant on a couple of quick Zoom meetings. Normal annual updates, just taking things on and off the list, showing what's completed as a standard. Making overhauls to programs come at times where you're really working on your transportation improvement program and your comprehensive plan process, which are, 5 to 10 year steps. We've looked at the information that's provided, and at this time, staff would like to begin this process because we go to Planning Commission first, hold a public hearing sooner than later. And that said, that's kind of the outline of the direction we recommend heading. Certainly this is up for, council deliberation in the future, but I want to make sure you folks see what we're bringing forward to the community on the city's behalf, because you will be the, the end of the line, and which is why we started here at the beginning of the process to inform you what we normally do, make sure we're all aware what we can and can't do based on this year, and then move forward from there. So, I don't know if there's any comprehensive planning elements Laura needs to add to that, but I think staff's all on the same page. And there you go.
All right, anybody have any questions for Mr. Leniszewski? Councilmember Naplin.
So I think I asked a version of this question before. The way we do our 6-year plan is it's just a kind of a big list of projects. And I think one of the reasons is we don't want to not have it on there and then have a grant come up and it's not on there and some kind of issue about that. So we have a lot in there. There's no total of how much all these projects would cost, but I'm guessing if we saw the total in the column of citywide or city responsibility, it would be a number that is not achievable, clearly. So how do other cities handle this when the reality of the city responsibility column is not something achievable?
So, am I still on here? So the 6-year tip is listed in creation off of your 20-year program, right? The 20-year program is how you establish your traffic impact fees. And when you do your fees, there are usually 3 to 4 participants, right? The city in cash, development related expenditures, which creates our traffic impact fee. We count on a certain amount of grants to help offset our costs. So when we do a project, we can achieve that. I don't know of anybody's fees who line up exactly. Another question that came up quite early in the process, and probably, I don't even think it was related, but it might have just stemmed from a conversation on our impact fees. We did speak specifically to Transpo regarding our fees. Their recommendation, and we will have a memo to the file to staff on that, is such that the last time the city did an overhaul was in 17. They went through the project list, from what I understand, and did a pretty comprehensive review. I believe, I was not here, but I believe it was kind of in conjunction to some North Island stuff and other projects. So they went through that, established the new fee at that time. What they recommended we do is typically, and we've already done it now, so go through the list in the master spreadsheet that established the estimate at the time in 17. So take a look in general on what we know came in. So our own projects, you know, Main Street, we had a bid on and construction project on, so we have a number, right? We had Toll Brothers extend 3rd Avenue, do frontage on Big Rock. They get credit for portions of that. We have those invoices. We know what that cost them. So we look in general at those things, and it has been like water where one's a little high, one's a little low, and you know, you can take the average and you get lucky. The level of mathematical manipulation that you might expect to occur in the program is not something that they believe and staff agrees that we want to mess around with. So a 20-year program, even a 6-year program, it's a macro level, right? You get down to the per project list, per project cost, how many units are in a subdivision, you're on the micro level. They don't, you know, you don't really want to blend your micro and your macros. But nonetheless, we are tracking those numbers. Larissa has updated that spreadsheet to make sure we're tracking. And honestly, based on what was implemented and installed since 17 and those costs, and we do inflate our costs, which the consultant recommends on an annual basis based on some inflation factor to keep up with you know, progress. It's like $300 plus or minus right now on what the fee would be if we, you know, started over today. Now, that doesn't take into consideration redoing all the numbers for construction. So you had your 2017 numbers. We've inflated those along the way to have a TIF that we do today, but just putting the numbers in that came in, it was off by 300, and it would have been a $300 reduction in our fee should we be manipulating our fee on an annual basis on a 20-year program, which is not recommended. So we're just tracking, and what they recommend is we kind of track and chug along the way to make sure it doesn't get wildly out of whack to the best of our abilities. So.
Yeah, and honestly, that wasn't the number I was worried about. There's the column that is city responsibility that's outside of the impact fee. And this list has a lot of things that if the community saw it, they would be like, wow, in 6 years, we're gonna get all this done. We don't have enough money ever to do those things. And so my question was, how do other cities reconcile the fact that they're providing a 6-year plan that's clearly not achievable?
So I unmuted myself. So for 20 years while I've been a planner in this state, it has been a consistent conversation at planning director conferences with Commerce. I haven't seen a city that actually can fund its 6-year program. I think that is a regional and statewide norm, if not even a national norm. I think it's really frustrating, honestly, for community development and for public works. Because what you look at is, like you said, you know, if you look in our capital facilities plan within our comp plan element, and then also in our transportation plan, it has a section on funding. And you kind of give all of these things that could fund a project. But the reality is you still can't piece all of those projects together in a 6-year period And Commerce really from day one, as I was a baby planner, always said, well, we do this so that you can put these all on a list so that if you can compile money together that you're going to be eligible. And I think that goes into the conversation I've had with several council members over the last 20 years. It's not a perfect answer, but at this point, the state hasn't made any adjustments to do it a different way.
And so there's no problem with me approving this plan, knowing that it's not achievable, that is kind of the standard how it works, and that approving this isn't somehow saying we're going to get it done because everyone has a plan that they know they can't get done.
Correct. It's not an obligation. It's just like our park plan. Our park plan has been alive for, it's a 20-year plan, and we've only done so many of those projects as well. So if you look at that park list, that also is supposed to be in 3 unique chunks of time. So it's common. I think it's frustrating, obviously for us as professionals, but I think it's even more frustrating for our elected officials or even our appointed officials like our planning commissions.
And I do want to add to that too, is the one nice thing about having the 6-year TAP, which you're not going to get done, is a lot of grant eligibility depends on what's on that list. So while you might have for a priority of mine for years was, let's get that, why don't we just get that Big Rock sidewalk done and get it connected to 275th and be done with it. But there was a lot of wisdom in waiting. And, that one will be developer driven, but having those things correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but like the 275th project, if it wasn't in our plan, we wouldn't have been eligible for those funds that were just given to do that project. And so the nice thing about this is that it provides flexibility for the city to be able to meet the needs of a specific grant program and get a project done using fewer city dollars. Steve, did I explain that well enough?
Yeah, well enough, sure.
Okay, sorry. Councilmember Lingle.
I'm just kind of curious. Last September, we spent a little bit of time and you provided sort of your decision-making metrics, and we came up with criteria that we would ultimately use when we looked at projects. Does that work in any way, whether it's in this plan or not? Would that work in any way intersect with this, so that we don't keep revisiting criteria and thought processes? Because what I recall about your matrix was you had, some really put some thought into the interrelationship between impact, fund availability, fundraising potential, et cetera. Do these things intersect at all, or can we, in a supplemental way at a policy level, work to use those criteria with this?
So I would say the only way that they intersect is by that program we kind of created last year and established, not that it's perfect or complete, but that's reference is this, right? So we're going to prioritize things on this list. The state doesn't care what our priorities are. It's our monies as an agency to spend on what we define as our priority. They just need to know that we've thought about it. It's on a list. It's been established. You've given it a look. You've got a preliminary estimate. You have a preliminary understanding of what it's going to take, how much impact it's going to create, and kind of where you're going to improve your network, right? It's concurrency related as well. So all this is dovetailed together. But yes, this doesn't confine us to doing anything in specific order. It is just a list that we're establishing as an agency and filing with the state on, hey, here's our plan. And they use these numbers for federal reporting on our state's behalf. It's kind of like the census with people. Our state has to have kind of a census of projects that they go to talk to the legislators on, as obtaining federal money for infrastructure. So they need to know our numbers too. And that's kind of the part of the tool that they use it for.
So when this comes back to us after going through planning commission and all of that, that's a reference point that I can make in understanding, what's on the list, but also having a sense of what your priorities are. Is that a fair assumption?
I don't think this will have anything about the city's priorities or.
No, I'm just asking you. Oh. I don't care about the state's thing. I'm talking about you. I'll be able to see the intersect. I'll be able to see the consistency as you come up with this list with those past criteria. Is that right?
I don't think so.
Well,
When we go forward with the next, choosing our capital project, we're gonna, entertain, whether it's for grant applications or something we want to do off the shelf,
okay.
right? Then we will have a conversation on that priority matrix relative to these projects and how we feel as a group on what needs to happen next for our city.
So
Right.
that'll be a second step then. is what you're
It's
saying.
a completely segregated step. They can be separate. They don't have to be the same. This is just the list. How we implement the list is up to us, and it is of no timeline consequence to the state.
Okay, so, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that it should flow from one to the other because you did good work on that. So it should flow. I don't care about the state's looking at. I'm talking about, that's up to, yeah, that's your stuff, right?
And I
I'm
think
talking about how we end up funding things.
And I think timing wise, it will probably lead into right after we complete this work, because grants are normally due through TAB, in the fall. So we'll have to start picking something we want to apply for. But that'll be a fun time with budget and summer and everything else.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Iyer and then Councilmember Brudnicki.
I just want to, I appreciate the conversation, the thought that goes into these. But I just want to interject. I mean, with kind of a side note, it's been an interesting concept that's come up in Seattle, where they've closed some of their streets to through traffic, and kind of, I mean, it gets to the point of a lot. I think what you're seeing is that cities have more streets than they can afford, and rated streets higher. And I don't really want to get in the conversation tonight, but I think people should read articles about that. What they're doing, taking advantage of the momentum and that occurs when people use the roads less and use the roads differently, and kind of speaks to the volume of roadway that we have. And it doesn't really make sense for all the city, because you got neighborhoods that were built, in the modern era, but grid cities, it's an interesting concept. So just check out Seattle, what they're doing with roads. So.
And if people are interested in having somebody from Seattle do a little workshop on that and why they did it and what their result is in a few months, I've got a lot of contacts in the mayor's office, so I'm happy to facilitate that. You just need to let me know.
Yeah,
it would be an interesting discussion.
Very much so. I'll send you an email.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any further conversation on the TIP? Councilmember Brudnicki.
I just want to comment that in the past 14 years of working on the various reviews of the TIP, that it's really nice to have those projects listed and sort of put there on paper, so that when we have to go for those grants, they're there and we can expedite that. And I haven't seen where, I look at it as a document where it's constantly reviewed, and then, things move down, things come off that list, things move around. So I haven't seen in the years that I've been here that we've done anything that's put us into some sort of financial position that was not, good for us, but actually we've made some very good decisions with that plan. So I don't really have a problem with it.
Great. All right, and if I don't see any more hands, we will go ahead and move on. Thank you, Mr. Laniszewski. So now we are to Agenda Bill 20-40, the ordinance for the 2019-2020 budget amendment for discussion and or decision. My guess at this point, because there was some feedback that's come back in the last couple of days, it'll probably be discussion only. And to preface it, we had at the last council meeting, council asked me for just a memo on what my actions are internally as far as trying to make sure we're being cautious with our expenses, not knowing the future financial outcome. We had our original resolution, and then we had before the packet went out, a finance committee meeting in which it sounded like folks wanted those restrictions listed in the ordinance, which I was fine with. Attorney advice came back and said, you're better off having it in as a resolution. So what you have before you is 3 ordinances, two ordinances and a resolution. that give all these options. And I think, I'll let Dana go ahead with the budget amendments, and then hopefully we can get some consensus of which one to move forward at the next meeting. So Ms. Mason.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and citizen. So I think what I'll do is just start off. I pulled some slides from the first presentation that was kind of a speed round of budget amendments. I'll just go through them real quickly, or a little bit slower. And if you have any questions, just speak up, please. And then there was also some confusion when when you look at the ordinance. So I just kind of want to show you how the city comes up with the budget appropriation, or has in the past. So here's the changes to fund balance. Revenues would be adding $517,000 overall. Expenditures adding $728,000 overall. And then there's a change in fund balance, which is just revenues minus expenditures.
Dana,
Are we supposed to see a screen?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for saying something.
It's been a long day.
Let me see if I can get back to my Zoom.
It's Tuesday. It's been a long week already.
All right, I think I can do this. There we go. Okay. I think it's going to be that one. Does that look? Can you
There
see
we
it?
go.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay. There's the front slide. So here we go. So revenues, increase of $517,000. Expenditures, an increase of $728,000. And that's what gives you your fund balance, or the change to the fund balance, which is $210,000. And then I wanted to show you just when you look at the packet. So what the city does is it appropriates the beginning fund balance plus the amended revenues. And that gives you this number down here. And what I did with the ordinance is I broke out the expenditures and the revenues. So into 3 different tables, so you could see just what the expenditures were. But and then you can see that the amended expenditures plus the amended fund balance equal that appropriated amount. And then here's your budgeted ending fund balance. And the amended funding balance minus the budgeted ending fund balance gives you your variance again. So I hope that makes sense. And I can send these slides out if anyone has any questions, or if you just want to look at it for a longer amount of time. So I thought we'd just go through real quickly the major major changes. Transfers in and out, which don't really have an effect on it. It's just a net effect, $343,000. Grant revenue and related expenditures. The revenue's already been received and the expenditures incurred, $326,000. Some fees, Seattle Public Utility revenues and fees that were just moving to the custodial fund where they belong. The loan proceeds that we didn't recognize as revenue, and then the payment for the truck, because we paid for it a little bit differently than we originally anticipated. And then in major changes in revenue, we got a community development block grant. This is revenue that was actually received from the 2018. We had an increase in building and planning fees based on 67 of the over 130 permits that are sitting in-house. And that also affects the water, sewer, and storm drainage general facility charges. And then there's some decreases to revenue. One is the sale of property, which everyone knows about. The street impact fees, which is just developer credits were given instead of collecting the impact fees. And then there was also a grandfathered in lower impact fees. And then water charges we're just bringing down to 2019 levels. Major expenditures changes explained. Professional services, there are some because we didn't have, we had unfilled positions in 2019, so that makes up a little bit of it. And then there's also professional services that are related to legal, development, engineering. Some of them are reimbursable. And then a salary and benefits, a big decrease, truing up to what we actually need in 2020. And then here's just the amended revenues, so you can see the budget, the original budget, the amendments, and then the amended budget. And the amended expenditures. One last slide, just kind of showing you the same thing. And then again, the change to fund balance. So does that was probably really fast again too, I apologize. Does anybody have any questions?
Councilmember Napland?
I just had a compliment. I have enjoyed working with Director Mason, and she's just an incredibly hard worker and answers every question we have in a way that's understandable. And anyway, I'm in support of these budget amendments. I still think that we are seeing that we have a shortfall in the general fund and some of our operating funds of revenue versus expenditures. Time will tell if, you know, a lot of times revenues come in higher than budgeted and expenditures come in lower. So maybe we won't have as big of a difference as it looks to be now. But I am in support of moving forward on these. I do like the idea of having the budget restrictions in the ordinance. I don't really have a problem with that. We just passed an ordinance today to amend an ordinance in one touch. And so the reasoning of moving it into a resolution, I think, was that they didn't want to, it might be cumbersome to have it in a resolution. I don't really see any problem just having it in the budget amendment, and then if we have to remove it later, updating that. But I'm curious how other council members feel about that.
Well, can we have the city attorney kind of address her theory on that so that the whole council can hear that and then have the discussion? Is that okay with folks?
Sure. Can I finish my comments and then I'll be done?
Yeah.
Okay. So the one request I have moving forward with these amendments is they're very, a lot of the revenue is dependent on building revenue, development revenue. And so moving forward, since that is really the largest variable, I mean, sales tax is variable, but boy, that development revenue is really the driver on where our revenue is going to be for our operating general fund account. And so what we budgeted in there was 68 individual building permits for new construction. And I believe Director Thomas can correct us and we made it consistent across all the different revenues. They were all based on the same number. So if we can watch those numbers and we approach that number, we look like we're going to exceed that number, we can really see if we're going to come in ahead of revenue or behind revenue. And so if we could get at each council meeting just an update, here's how many permits we've issued, so that we can kind of tick off the tally or whatever, how we're doing on the goal of 68 to meet budget, and then we will know if we're running ahead or behind. Anyway, that's my one request, because that's the big unknown. And that's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Soto.
Yes, so just briefly, there's no issue with having the budget restrictions in the ordinance. That's fine if that's what you want to do. Part of the reason that I recommended putting it in a resolution is for just practical purposes. It's a lot easier to amend a resolution or repeal a resolution than it is an ordinance. But one of the other reasons is that this ordinance is actually amending the budget. And when you are removing the restrictions at some point in the future, if you do, assuming you do, you might not necessarily be also amending the budget at that time or making any other appropriations. You've already appropriated that money through this budget amendment. So you don't really need to do another ordinance that's amending the other budget ordinance. So really it's fine to do it that way. If you want to have everything in one document, it's really just kind of the ease of making changes later.
And I'll just say my one concern with the ordinance versus the resolution is you know, where we're going to go in planning. And, you know, we've got that, you know, as we talked at the last meeting, we've got the position open in the community development department ongoing, even though we're not doing interviews at this time. And when it becomes apparent that that help is needed, my concern is having to wait 2 weeks or even 6 weeks on it to get it moving forward, because the hiring process and interview process takes so long. But that was my only concern as far as having all of that stuff in the ordinance, is that one particular position. Councilmember Lingle.
I think in F&A and with our other conversations, Mayor, I prefer an ordinance. I think in general, you appropriate money with ordinance, not with a resolution. Resolutions are not as binding as ordinance. And all the municipal budgets I've been involved with, when more money is appropriated, it's been through ordinance. And really, and I appreciate, you know, the observations of our council. But the reason I've been so focused on incremental decision-making is not just because of potential instability in sales tax proceeds. It's also about not knowing what's happening with things like the CARES Act reimbursement. So it comes from several different directions. And I looked at the I've looked at the ordinance a couple of times, and I've tried to understand some different ways to do it. One of the things that I am not supportive of in the way the ordinance is drafted is we have concepts that are, I don't like the word frozen, but we have concepts that we are holding back on. We don't really know what the amounts of money are that are tied to those things. So at some point, you've got to go back and revisit those things. I would rather have some clarity around what I would be releasing in the future than not have clarity and, you know, go through a rehashing experience around, you know, what the personnel items were going to be, or something like that. So that's one example. I am still very concerned about professional services, Mayor. You and I've talked about that. There's things that were anticipated in 19 and 20 that I hope are not proceeding. That doesn't mean that there would be a change in the professional line item adjustments, but I don't know what's all in there now because there's been so many moving parts. So that's something I'd want more information on. Let me just reach over because we now have, thank you, by the way, for marking the versions. That makes me so happy.
And to Councilmember Lingle's point, and particularly on the staffing positions, we've already budgeted a specific amount for those. So if that needs to be added to either a resolution or an ordinance, that's not a big deal. You know, Dana can do that, you know.
Because I don't want a lot of future discussion about what something costs. I don't think that's a good use of time. I think we should know approximately, it doesn't have to be to the penny, but approximately or an up to amount for a function, whatever that is. And then, so the releasing it is known on both sides, how much is coming back into play.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, the ordinance, you know, there's other little things, but that can go, we can talk about later that we don't have to tonight. But the other thing I think is really in play here is all this other possible grant money that comes in. And an ongoing concern for myself, and I know other council members, this has been discussed in F&A and also at Cal, is that, you know, expending money this year just means less money next year and in the next year. And our goal should be to get to 2023. And I know everybody's in agreement with that, including you, Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And so to the extent that money comes in a reimbursement situation, it's not going to be dollar for dollar. I realize that. I'm, you know, familiar enough with that processes, those kind of processes. I want to make sure that we are understanding each other, that just because we get reimbursement doesn't mean it's automatically available to spend.
Right.
And the reason for that, and I don't think you disagree with this philosophically, but I want to be sure that that is embedded in the ordinance in some manner, so that, let me give an example, a simple one. We have $100,000 of COVID expenses that we hope will be reimbursed. And in the end of the day, like Sean said, we don't get all that. Let's just say we only get 80,000. Okay. So, you know, that means $20,000 is going to stay embedded in our side of the equation, the City of Duval's contribution. When that 80,000 comes in as revenue, I want to make sure that it is not just in revenue, but we understand each other, that it goes back into beginning fund balance.
Yeah.
And another part of why I'm saying this, I mean, it's not just looking forward. We're going to need that money in, you know, 21 and 22. And I do not want to lose positions. Yeah, I don't think you do either.
We've had plenty of conversations on that one.
Yeah, we're not going to want to do that. So the other reason, though, to do that is that, let's see, I hope I'm not going to lose my train of thought on putting it back up there. Oh, is because something you and I've also talked about, Mayor, which is how Duval was sort of doing this weird thing when they were budgeting for years and years about including beginning fund balance in the budget. And you acknowledged to me, and I appreciate you sharing, that's just the way Duval did it forever. And it shouldn't have been done that way. So this is a way for us to kind of move to handling our money differently.
Yep.
And doing the financial planning. And now that the financial department is getting, you know, in a real rhythm, we're in a position where maybe we can start to do some of that. And so that's another piece I'd like to see added into an ordinance as opposed to a resolution. And I really see resolutions as more policy related documents or program related documents overall. That's the way I've seen resolutions do, or they're philosophical statements. Money I've always seen money primarily moved in additional appropriations through ordinance. That's just my experience, and that's where my comfort level is.
So I just want to say, Councilmember Lingle, I have appreciated those conversations we've had, particularly in the last week. And just to give an experience, Councilmember Brednicki may remember this. Years ago, we had a reimbursement from the county on something, and we had somebody that wanted to just move it straight into their budget. And I said, hard stop on that, no way. So to your point, I think, you know, when we look at how those salaries become allocated, while emergency manager shifted to primarily general fund, that it'll be a little bit more complex because that is multiple funds. But you know, that money should, you know, in theory, if it's to dedicated funds, it goes back to the dedicated funds. If it's general fund, it goes back to the general fund. And so, you know, I don't know if we need to put that in there as ordinance, because I suspect Dana's on the same page as that, and I would suspect all of our directors are as well. But I don't have a problem with that being in language. I do see Anne Marie's point, but you know, we've got a lot of financial policy work to be done, and this pandemic's gotten in the way of a lot of that, unfortunately. But I think we're all getting to the point that I think many of council starting to understand that I do want to do many of those things. It's just a matter of how we do it and when we get there. And some of this temporary stuff is just fine. You know, it'll help us draft and write the policy in the long run.
I also think it keeps us more engaged in a way that's meaningful. Mm-hmm. And that might not be, maybe that's, as Councilmember Iyer says, that's the politics of it, right? And this can be one of our best times, actually, even though it's a horrible time. It can also be one of our best times. So I appreciate your indication of support, and I think we can put something together. Probably, if you want to do it through F&A, I think we can come up with something and come back to council next time.
Yep.
But I would like a little more detail on professional services so I can get my comfort level there.
Okay. Councilmember Hoag, you had your hand up.
Why couldn't we just do two separate ordinances? That way, if we choose to remove that one, it won't affect the budget amendments.
I'm assuming this question is for me to answer. So that would be totally fine. You can do that. And then again, since you might not actually be reappropriating any money when you remove the restrictions, that would be an easier way to do it. Then you don't have to also amend your budget again.
Okay. Anyone else? Councilmember Remington and then Councilmember Iyer.
Well, I sure appreciate it. I learned a lot from my fellow council members and from Anne Marie and Dana. Thank you so much. I always try to figure out how to simplify as much as we can. And I do like the idea of 2 ordinances. I was going to say personally, I like the idea of a resolution so that, we can quickly change one piece of it without having to go back and do the whole thing. But if we can do it under 2 ordinances, I would support that as well. As much as we can simplify this process, because we're going to be into it pretty deep in the next several months doing our next 2-year budget. And I would just like to make sure, as not just for us as council, but for staff as well, that we don't have to take too many steps.
Councilmember Iyer.
So I just want to generally comment on the overall, where we're at in terms of spending and the economy and, the recent uptick. I mean, generally I'm concerned with the increase in spending that's proposed in light of the, very serious potential for imminent national downturn that'll inevitably hit our local economy, being Seattle area. It's also concerning just because we're on a trend to be spending more than our revenues. And I think I just generally want to keep my concerns at a very high level, because I think it keeps out of there's a lot of consternation that's occurred over the details of those, trying to work to find things to spend less on but I think, when you're in a position like this, we have the potential that revenues could flatten out. And then we're at a potential where we need to do one of 3 things. And I know that everyone understands this, but I like to keep it simple for myself so I can, telegraph to where we're at the next budget conversation or the next budget adjustment. And those three options are tax increases, reductions of costs, or spending down savings. And all 3 of those are, problematic. The tax increases are really problematic right now for both the reason that, you see in the utility bills that while we do have an affluent community, we do have the impacts of employment troubles and, financial troubles are going to hit our folks that live here. And then that coupled with the, what we've seen in property tax increases. And as I've expressed previously, I feel like we have a robust and appropriately robust utility. We try to take care of what we have. So I think that that's a difficult well to go to. And clearly, we've had some heated conversations and kind of really some tumultuous conversations about reduction in cost. And when it comes to spending down savings, while I think that is a stopgap, our savings and our ending fund balance represent opportunity. And, when we have conversations about city halls and, these big needs, these big things that we want to, push us forward as a city into another kind of phase, I think, if we, soak up too much of these ending fund balances, especially general fund, we lose that opportunity to potentially use those funds for something that would move us into the future. And, I appreciate all the hard work that the mayor and other council members have done to sharpen the pencil on this. And, I'm generally supportive because I do believe that Duval is an odd duck in terms of revenues, and that the reductions could, would potentially be slowed in terms of impacts. But I do very much vividly remember 2004 and 5, and people wanted to drink the Kool-Aid and wanted to think it was going to be okay and wanted to think that it wasn't going to get us. And in 5, and even in 6, and even towards 7, people wanted to believe. I owned a house, and I sold my house in 2009, and just barely got out. And, you know, retrospect, I wish would have kept it, but I remember feeling like, you know, a lot of people were, you know, were optimistic up until, you know, the very bitter end. And I really feel like we're going to need to prepare ourselves for a potential peak, and hopefully it doesn't happen. But I really feel like we're kind of, you know, that we need to actively look at our costs going into the rest of this year, and you know, really understand that if we're serious about not increasing, you know, not doing that, that we're looking at a tax increase of some kind. And I think we should be honest about that and put it out there. And then secondly, that spending into savings, while we did save it, it has a cost, and that it takes away that opportunity. So I'm doing this also in general goodwill to say, don't be surprised if don't be surprised by my stance in 4 months, 3 months, if I'm feeling like, you know, we haven't been proactive enough and we're still heading in a direction that's not sustainable. So, but in general, I'm fine with the ordinance. With the ordinance, and I would be comfortable at this point with where we're at moving forward with this.
We haven't heard from council members Brodnicki, McHenry, or Mayor Pro Tem Remington. Mayor Pro Tem Remington, you had your hand up first. You're on mute.
I always sound better muted. I just wanted to thank Councilmember Iyer. I really appreciate his comments. I don't want to repeat anything what he said, but I will add one more thing. There's a lot of folks in our town that are hurting right now. Businesses, individuals who have lost income, who are really unsure of the future. And, you know, I think there's plenty who still have their income and doing well. But I think we need to really reflect, even in our own budget, that we're being responsible. And I like to think we're always responsible with our budget. But especially at this time, I think we need to be sensitive. Our citizens are watching the state making cutbacks, the counties making specific cuts. So many of our citizens are tightening their belts. And I think we as a city need to show respect for what's going on around us. We are in a little different spot because we're not as influenced and dependent on retail as many other cities are. It's really easy to get locked into that. But at the same time, we've watched citizens turn down the monies requested, bonds for the hospital, for the school district. I think our citizens were very generous in helping support our transportation funds so that we can start maintaining our roads and so on, making safety improvements. But this is a good time for us to be careful and to be really wise, smart about how we approach our budget. It's easy to want to look at things as being rosy, but right now I think we're all very thankful that we have a rainy day fund, and I just want to hope that we continue that because there's so many unknowns. Mm-hmm. The one last thing I'll say is we want to keep every position within our city. We want to save employees' jobs. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I think we're all on that same page of we're going to do everything we can. You know, I've watched many of our directors really work hard to say, hey, here's some things we can whittle down on and we can delay. I don't want us to stop moving forward. I don't want us to run for the hills, but our citizens watch closely. And I think the decisions we make both tonight and in the future on the budget are going to make a big difference on the health of this city moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember McHenry and then Councilmember Brodnicki.
I really can't add a whole lot to what Mayor Pro Tem Remington just said. Also appreciate Councilmember Iyer. I do support this. I'm looking forward to getting into budget season and seeing how we can work with the budget and trim where we can. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I would also support the Councilmember Hoag was talking about separate ordinances. If that helped things along, I would be supportive of that as well.
Okay. Councilmember Brodnicki.
So for perspective, I guess I lived through 2 major downturns with this city, and in this now going on the 3rd possibility of some sort of downturn coming forward. I will tell you from a business standpoint, I thought I was really going to be hit hard, and I was surprised at how much support I've had from my clients. So it seems that they seem to feel confident going forward. But I guess the only thing I want to contribute is the fact that in working with, this is the 2nd mayor I've worked with, who is doing an outstanding job of looking at the situation and monitoring it and managing it with her staff. So I'm feeling in my 3rd round pretty confident with the staff, the mayor, and the council at how they're going to manage our finances going forward.
Thank you. And it sounds like we have relative consensus to just do the 2 ordinances. It might be a little bit split, but I think that those are in favor of moving forward now, or sounds like are okay with doing that 2 ordinances. So in my perspective, we'll just move that direction unless there's objection. But I just, Councilmember Iyer is not on the Finance Committee. So this is something that I did share with the Finance Committee last week, and I should share with the whole council is, we are all scared. We don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of looking like we're going to be okay through the fall, but again, that 2nd wave could just absolutely devastate us. My goal is to not lose any staff and to continue to maintain services. And before, we've got lots of theories about ending fund balance and what have you, but we're also in a very unprecedented time. And I want to keep those reserves completely full as much as possible. And I want to do everything that we can throughout the next biennium budget process to not dip into those reserves and update those policies and get, if we need to increase some of those levels, do what we can to get there to provide that stability so that we can have the long-term stability for our staff. We discussed a lot about previously before the pandemic about the public safety sales tax. And the Public Safety Committee started discussing that, and the whole purpose of that is providing some long-term stability for our public safety and having a guaranteed income that can help support the level of service we need. And I think we all realize that we're not going to have the resources to potentially do that this year. I would love to be able to do it because I think that is something that, to Councilmember Naplin's point, when we did the Transportation Benefit District, we have a really low sales tax rate, and that's something that a lot of folks are willing to support. But I think at this point, we do need to wait until we start to see what those numbers are coming in and how our community is impacted. I am one of those families where I have a family member in my household looking for work in the middle of this, and it's savings and my mayor salary. So when I look at these things, I'm also looking at it from the lens of what my family is experiencing and knowing that there are other families that are much worse off than we are. And so, this is between the city funds and what have you, this is a constant, perspective that we're talking about internally and what have you. And I appreciate this discussion with council and Finance Committee. If we can get the 2 ordinances separated, I hope that we can get this just sealed up at the next council meeting. Councilmember Langell.
I just want to know, I'm just trying to get some clarity for Finance and Administration Committee because lots of moving parts on all of this. So we're going to do an ordinance that addresses the budget amendments, and embedded in that ordinance will be the funds that are authorized but not yet released. Is that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the second ordinance will be the ordinance that releases funds. And that's how we're going to do it, right? I just want to be sure I'm right.
Wouldn't the second ordinance be basically what the resolution is right now, the restrictions part?
Well, it may be worded differently. I mean, we haven't fleshed out the wording, so that's part of what I'm saying. I mean, I don't think that right now, procedurally, I don't know how the two concepts, when I originally was envisioning incremental release, I was originally envisioning that is embedded in one ordinance, which is fine, you know, that was just a concept. So if we're gonna bifurcate that step, I'm trying to get clarity on how those two things will work together. And I just want to know, you can't answer this question now, I just want to know, is that what we're going to work on in Finance and Administration Committee? And because I want to be sure that what I'm thinking we're going to work on is what the mayor is talking about. I want to make sure we're in sync with two ordinances, what each one will do.
Ms.
The second ordinance will be passed in the future, and the second ordinance will look at, you know, some specific things, but we want the structure all set up to work now. I think we want to make sure that that is clear for everybody, so the predictability takes away some angst for all of us.
Yeah, so the two ordinances, the one will be your budget amendment ordinance. That was the original draft. I think that was circulated before. And then the second ordinance will be the ordinance with the restrictions. So when you remove the restrictions and whatever additional language you were all talking about, clarifying in that language, then you would just be repealing that ordinance.
Right, but the second ordinance wouldn't be passed until you're removing the restrictions, because you don't know, all those restrictions may not be removed. I mean, you may remove some and not remove others.
I thought that the understanding was that you were going to have two ordinances where the one is just amending the budget. The second one is having the restrictions, and then later when you remove those restrictions, you're just repealing that ordinance.
Well, I don't know why you would make that assumption, because the fact is some money might came in, or some things the mayor may have as a higher priority and be willing to give up other things. I mean, that's the problem with being in a very fluid situation. You know, I'll just use the example of the finance position. When that was originally described to us in Finance and Administration, the result of that position change actually saves us money when you really start to look at it. Okay, so that is very different than some of the other things that are listed, which are simply outgoes with no reimbursement or no savings. They're just different things. So I don't think you can make the assumption that the release is going to completely match what's held back. I mean, I just don't see how you would know that, because you don't know how much money you got coming in. You may,
but you can amend. You can then amend that ordinance rather than amending the budget.
Right.
So
yes,
you can.
I understand that part, but you're not passing. You're passing an ordinance that specifies certain restrictions being in as part of that amendment. That's what I was describing. And a second action, releasing funds.
I think that's where
removing the entire amount. Let me give you an example. 500,000. 500,000 is the amended budget in my example. You may be holding back 200,000. Of the 200,000, you may ultimately only be able to afford releasing 100,000. You see what I'm saying? We don't know. Releasing the entirety only holds true if the revenue projections are equal or greater. If the revenue projections turn out to be still too ambitious, then you wouldn't be able to release it all. So I'm talking mechanics here. I'm not talking amounts of money. I don't see how you could automatically agree to releasing all of the things in restriction, because you won't know until the end of the second quarter.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about, though. We're just talking about getting the ordinance drafted, and then whenever you want to release whatever, then you can address it at that time. I'm not saying that you'd automatically just release all of the restrictions at one time. You will go through and figure out what it is that you want to do at the time that you're actually making the release.
And that's the clarification I'm asking, because I want to know what we're working on in F&A.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what we're working on is a base ordinance which identifies restrictions and estimated amounts. The mayor already said she was fine with that. And it sounds like we're going to do another ordinance that actually is the mechanics of releasing funds. It sounds like that's what we're working on in F&A. Am I correct?
That's not what my understanding was. My understanding was that there was going to be the budget amendment without restrictions listed. Then there was going to be an ordinance with the restrictions listed. And I suppose if you want to work on the third ordinance to create the mechanism for releasing that you deal with later, you could start working on that. But
well, I'm just going to tell you, I'm not going to vote for an ordinance without restrictions. So,
I'm not saying that. I'm saying,
I mean, that's why I'm asking for clarification about what we're working on. Are we working on a budget ordinance with restrictions? We can work on the language on that. That's the first thing I want to know. Is that what we're working on?
I thought we were going to pull the restrictions out of the ordinance and do a separate ordinance with the restrictions, and maybe we could put the mechanism for releasing in that ordinance as well. Would that work?
I can't tell because I don't have anything in front of me to see how two things interact.
So,
right.
So Councilmember Lingle, I think how Director Mason is describing it is how I understood it too, is the plain budget amendment ordinance, and then you immediately pass the ordinance that has the budget restrictions and the terms of release. That okay. Every one of those, like, I don't feel like you need to come and release everything all at once, right? Because there's going to be some things that we probably just won't get to this year. Right. But what if you do that ordinance, do the plain budget amendment, keep that separate, do the ordinance that puts the restrictions and the release protocol on the second ordinance, which then gives you the budget, so you don't have to amend the budget.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Come back, and then you go and you look at the restrictions separately, and so that those can be looked at individually in a separate ordinance that restricts what you can do with what's already appropriated.
And that part's fine, but they have to interrelate.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They can't stand apart. They have to be connected.
Well, I think that's part of the point is, like, oftentimes in a budget, when we do our budgets, there's a lot of ordinances we have to pass either before or right after the budget, and I see this as kind of that same thing. That you get the ordinance, you amend the budget, and then the next agenda item is approving the ordinance that has what the caveats on restrictions and release that we've all agreed to.
Okay, I guess what I want to be sure that I'm upfront about is I would not want to vote favorably on an ordinance that did not have a mechanism for the restrictions. And we can talk at another point about how that's going to work. That's the part I want to know, what we're going to work on, how this will work together.
How about you, Dana, and I talk about that offline? Because I think we're on the same page, but I think it's about how we're discussing it.
It's very possible. That's why I was asking for clarification about what we're actually going to be working on.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
All right. Ready to move on, folks? All right, we have one last item of business, and this is the, oh no, we have two more, I'm sorry. Agenda Bill 20-41, the ordinance for utility service for occupancy, and this is just introduction, administration, and I'll let Ms. Thomas take it away, and this is a small basic ordinance. That's a technicality. We do feel that it's very COVID related based on previous situations that we've experienced in the last couple of months. And Ms. Thomas, feel free to take it away.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is actually an item that we started working on a couple months ago. Carrie jump-started this ordinance, I don't know, I want to say it was February or March, and then COVID hit us. And so we are just now picking it up again. We've been working with our attorney on this as well. And essentially, we're going to add a new section of code into Chapter 10. And you have a copy of that. It's called Utility Service for Occupancy, Chapter 10.20. We'll also be amending Chapter 2, which is essentially our code enforcement section. What this really does is it sets forth a policy that says that you have, for health, life, and safety purposes, that you have to maintain sewer and water at the property. This is really to provide proper sanitation, maintenance, and appropriate living conditions. We did put in kind of what the expenditures would look like, because we've been asked to do that for all of our ordinances that we do. We estimate that to do this and codify it, it'll cost about $160. Our estimated city attorney assistance is somewhere between $500 and $1,000. We could, because of this, because there is a code enforcement mechanism, so there's enforcement procedures, appeals, and so forth. So if we had an issue that would come up, we would incur costs for code enforcement. So that could potentially be for a hearing and an appeal. But we also have within this ordinance a mechanism for revenue as well, which is essentially a fine of $250 per violation. And so as most typical policy is drafted, you always have a purpose section and then a definition section. And then you go into our primary statement, which is we are going to require water and sewer if there's a occupied structure. And then we talk about what unlawful occupancy means. And then we also talk about investigation and enforcement procedures. We also talk about what the appeal would look like. We also talk about what we say is vacant structure must be secured upon violation, and then what the standards of securing it are. And then we talk about abatement and then reoccupancy as well. And I know that at least the chapter went out last week in your packet, but we did just send out the agenda bill today. So that's why I shared the screen with you. We're not in a rush on this, but we do want to just keep it moving. And so this is just some of the information that we filled out. And then again, just a short fact summary sheet. And so we could take action as early as the next council meeting. Are there any questions from council at this point?
Councilmember Iyer.
Do we look at other cities' codes in terms of like, I guess directing enforcement to other sections of code that are, so, I mean, we don't start siloing enforcement procedures in each code subset. Does that make sense at all? I haven't thought a ton about this. It's just my...
No, it totally makes sense. And so like you have different titles. So like land use is in Title 14. So in land use, we have enforcement, but enforcement is defined in Chapter 2. So all of our enforcement is defined in Chapter 2. So this policy tells you what you have to do, but ultimately the code enforcement section is within, which is the mechanism for the hearing examiner, is located in Chapter 2. That's why we're having to do a little bit of both. One thing, and this, it's not necessarily important for now, but it is pertinent, is we are just starting the process of updating our code enforcement section. And when our attorney reviewed this, they had reminded us, yes, now we understand why you're updating, starting the process of updating your code enforcement. Our code enforcement section is really old, and all different departments fall into Chapter 2. So whether it's sewer, water, planning, building, mostly public health, life, and safety. So this is pretty typical, I believe, and Carrie might be able to chime in here, but I believe this one was a example of maybe of the city of Snohomish. They had worked on this policy recently. There are a lot of communities that have a policy that's similar. Carrie, do you want to weigh in at all?
So yes, that is correct, Laura. It is from the city of Snohomish, and it was brought to us through a contact of Mayor Ackerlanders.
Thank you, Carrie. Did you want to weigh in at all, Mayor? And then I see that Councilmember Amy McHenry.
Yeah, I'll just weigh in quickly. And, I think folks remember just a few weeks ago, we were talking about the RV and the human waste that was stacked behind it. And it turns out it was from a residence. And so while this doesn't happen often in our city, our staff really need the tools to be able to manage it from a public safety and public health perspective. And we recognize that people all come down to hard times, but if we have the occupancy side, another thing that we might be able to do is connect some of these people with services to be able to get their utilities back connected. And not having a policy in place kind of helps limit that. If they're getting a ticket, they have an opportunity to appeal, but then that also provides an opportunity for us to potentially connect them with human services. The other side of it is that it'll help us manage squatters. So if we get into a situation where we start to have a lot of vacancies, which we back in the 2008 recession, we had some really derelict homes, and that was a real possibility. So I see this as being a tool to help us manage that should it happen on a larger scale. And also, again, be able to help folks out that might need assistance and don't know how to ask out for help.
Yeah. Just to add one thing, because we have had some recent code enforcement in the last year within our community, besides the one the mayor talked about, where there was a property in the north end of town that was being occupied in a fairly derelict building and pulling water illegally off of an adjacent building.
Councilmember McHenry.
So could you clarify, I just want to fully understand, like some of the section 10.20.080, the standards for securing structures, when they talk about structures in that, you're also talking about RVs and vehicles as well, or is that section specific to structures on a property?
So it does, so this is actual physical structures that are hooked up to sewer and water. So an RV would not be hooked up to sewer and water.
But this would cover RVs as well. Anyone occupying a property or no?
No, this is why we brought forth the parking ordinance, which still has some more work to be done. Chief Hurt got tied up with other pressing matters the last couple of weeks, but that's why we're bringing forward the parking ordinance to help address that issue.
So then what about, sorry, one more question, if that's okay. I just want to understand, I was looking through the definitions. So are tents considered a structure, or are you just talking about brick and mortar?
It's brick and mortar. It's an actual structure that has a connection to our sewer and water system.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
No, that's a really good question.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions from council? Mayor Pro Tem Remington.
Thank you, Mayor. How does this dovetail? I mean, if someone doesn't pay their utility, at some point you shut it off. It obviously puts somebody in a position where they're connected, but they're not connected. Have we thought through that one piece of this?
So yeah, there's a couple of things that are being worked on besides the parking ordinance. We're also looking at policy change that would require, because a lot of times when something gets shut off, it's sometimes more prevalent for a renter. So we're looking at our policies to have the owner responsible for sewer and water, which we think will help reduce the amount of potential shutoffs. One of the discussions that we've had internally, and this is likely kind of a movement across Washington, if not across the United States, is I think it will become more difficult as we move forward to shut off sewer and water in general for various reasons, because they're needed for health, life, and safety. So I think, we're gonna have to stay tuned on that issue. I think it's gonna be harder to shut services off in the future.
Thank you.
Right. Anyone else? So I want to poll council real quick. Do we have consensus? Chief Hurt has a comment, I guess. So and then we'll move on.
I just wanted to touch on what Councilmember McHenry was asking. We are also going to be bringing forward a camping ordinance soon, Amy. So hopefully that will address the concerns with the tents.
So do we have consensus? I haven't heard a lot from folks. I'm taking that as this kind of feels like potentially it's an easy one to go. Do we have anyone that does not want to bring this forward at the next meeting? But first off, Councilmember Iyer.
My plan is to just try to look at some other code. I don't want you guys to do an extensive look at other code, but that's what I would do in the interim, is see if I can find other. I've never really come across this too many times. I'm sure it's there, obviously, but I'll just look at other codes, see what other. I just want to make sure we're kind of consistent with the region.
Yep. All right. So with that, if we don't have any other comments, we'll move this forward to the next meeting for second touch, potentially final touch, depending on what council decides. And we'll move to our last item of business, which is the walk-on item, Agenda Bill 20-42 for our Washington Federal Banking Ordinance. And this was just a small administrative oversight. Most cities don't bring their banking ordinances through their councils, but that's what we, it was recommended that we do so. So I'm hoping that we can just, the finance director has reported on this already, so I'm hoping that we can just move this forward tonight and get it completed. But Ms. Mason?
Right, so we went out for RFP in March 9th. We got 3 responses and ended up selecting Washington Federal as the city's new bank. The former bank cost the city $14,000 to $15,000 a year in banking fees. And with the waived fees and the earnings credit rate with Washington Federal, we'll be able to eliminate that fee with us if we keep a minimum balance in our account, which we should be able to do no problem. So, so we have gone ahead and already we're using them, and they are amazing. They're one of those banks that you call and you get a person and they help you immediately. So it's just, and we've also started scan deposits. So now our accountant or accounting associate does not have to drive to the bank every day and deposit the checks. They're just scanned and boom, they're in the city's account. So there's a security thing there as well. So,
Great.
Are there any questions?
Seeing none, is there anyone that would like to suspend the rules and make a motion, and then suspend the rules and then make a motion if they are suspended? Councilmember Lingle?
I make a motion that we suspend the rules.
Second, Matt Iyer.
So Councilmember Lingle moved, Councilmember Iyer seconded. Any further discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. I did not hear any no's. For the record, if you did say no, please raise your hand so that we could record it. And seeing none, the motion passes. And with that, we don't have any further business. So unless there are, Mayor Pro Tem Remington, yes.
I apologize. It's a late night, but I didn't want to, I should have said something when council had a chance to talk. Last Friday, May 15th, was Peace Officer Memorial Day. Yeah. That's when we just recognize officers that have died in the line of duty or been disabled and can't work. There's about 800,000 police officers serving in the United States. So just briefly, the stats on that, there's been about 22,000 officers who have died in the line of duty since they began keeping statistics. Last year, that was 135. And especially with Chief Hurt here, I wish all of our officers could be here. We've had officers shot here in Duval, and we're one of the safest, if not the safest town in the state, statistically. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the outstanding work our officers do, the fact that they do put their lives at risk. And Chief Hurt, if you would pass on our deep appreciation for our officers and I realize with the coronavirus, there's a lot of limitations, but I wish we could be there to just thank them individually. But if you could do that on our behalf, I know the mayor and council would certainly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'm not good at paying attention to those dates. I get down in the weeds. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And I feel the same way. I can't, anytime I think about our officers being in any situation that's not safe, it tears out my heart. And I think it does to all of you as well. And they literally put their lives on the line for our community every day. And I couldn't be more grateful for the team that the chief has put together.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry to do this after such a beautiful moment, but you took a vote to suspend the rules, but you did not.
We haven't done it.
I'm sorry.
It's been a long
now I have to
week.
go back to the rules.
I apologize, council. It's been a long week trying to keep track of all this stuff. So we do have a motion that needs to be made. We suspended the rules. My apologies. Do we have a motion regarding the Washington Federal?
Could you repeat the bill number again?
Agenda Bill 20-42.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve Agenda Bill 20-42, approving Washington Federal.
Matthew Iyer, second.
Okay, so Councilmember Lingle moved, Councilmember Iyer second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those say no, and if so, raise your hand and we'll get you on the record for Ms. Wyckoff. Seeing none, that's unanimous. And thank you again, Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Remington, for bringing that up. We have quite the amazing crew here, and we are very fortunate. So thank you for acknowledging that day. And with that, we are adjourned. Hope you all have a good week.
Take care, everyone.